Hey, y'all, I'm Steve Watson, senior pastor of Reservoir Church. I'm here with my friends Tom and Adi Wasink. We've been friends for years, and they've been friends of Reservoir Church and me of their community sanctuary for years as well. Tom and Adi, I think apart from just loving you as people and treasuring your friendship, you're one of the closest things we have to like a sister church. So it's a joy to get to talk to you as always, and also to introduce you to those in my community that haven't met you before. So Tom and Adi, welcome. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. And I have such warm feelings both to you and Reservoir, and have friends who attend the church and our own unique history, Steve. Yeah, it's a delight.
Yeah, I'm excited too to be with you. I feel like the story that we tell, you've been a part of it for so long that you're familiar with so many different pieces of it. And so sharing the story with you and having you read it has been a really fun part. And also just your enthusiasm for the story and the storytelling has been really meaningful.
Yeah,
You're
well,
pretty
we'll get
much
to
like anyone who likes the book.
well, we'll get to the book in just a second. And it's probably one of the only books, maybe the only book out in print that I'm like a bit character in. I show up kind of anonymously or so on one page, I think. So that's what the real reason I like it. No. All right. So before we talk about your book, this really awesome book, Sanctuary, Queer in a Church in the Heartland, uh, by you, Adi Wasink, senior pastor of Sanctuary Church. Tom Wasink, the non-senior pastor, whatever your title is, Sanctuary Church, and your friend Katie Mborick. I know Katie's, is that how I say her last name? Katie Mborick? Am I
Yeah.
close? So before we talk about that book for a second, I just want to situate you. I have visited your church and your city in the wonderful state of Iowa, where I live on the East Coast. Not everyone is like has been to Iowa before. Someone I know who moved from Iowa to Cambridge, Mass, was introducing himself to people, and they were like, "Iowa." He said, "Oh, around here we pronounce that Ohio." And I thought, okay, so for those that don't know their geography or haven't gotten out enough, like tell us about Iowa City, like cornfields, right? Like, right? Tell us about Iowa City.
First of all, I come from Chicago. That's only 4.5 hours away, and no one knows where Iowa is in
No.
Chicago either. But it's a delight. We came here 20 some years ago for Tom, but it is Iowa City itself is just a super lovely college town, with all kinds of fun things to do. It's charming, it's liberal, um, it's it's sweet. It We give the city itself credit for changing our outlook on all kinds of things, coming from Chicago to a more progressive city.
Yeah, we love it. And like Andy said, we came here. We have the typical Iowa story where even being from the Midwest ourselves, living in Chicago for a while, we came here initially for me to do a fellowship. I'm a psychiatrist and I was doing a research fellowship with a renowned researcher here. But we had the typical Iowa plan. We're coming for 2 years, and then the 2 years got extended to three, and now we're here 25 years later. So actually 28. We came in 1996. And so Iowa City is just a lovely town. It does have hills and it has a river that flows through it. And to us, the academicness and truthfully, the progressive ethic and vibe here in the middle of um, the in the middle of the cornfields, and has been it's really been central to propelling us on our journey. You know, we would like to say it was church or the voice from above, but a lot of it was what Iowa City is, who it represents, who lives here that influenced us to take the journey that we did.
Yeah, when I visited Iowa City, actually reminded me a little bit of Cambridge, Mass, but less crowded and maybe more affordable real estate, but some cultural depth.
That's
Yeah,
what we say all the time. We're just like Boston.
yep.
Just the
Cambridge is the Iowa of the East.
that's right. Thank you. That'll be our
Yeah,
new way of talking
the
about
Iowa City of the East. Yeah.
it. So your book tells this wonderful and beautiful story that plays out over years of a church being a evangelical heartland church, maybe progressive in different ways for the evangelical world, but becoming a church that sort of moves from toward being welcoming toward the LGBTQ community and eventually toward like really being embracing, right? And to, as you say, to queer in the church, or like reshaping your church as that community comes to belong. I feel like in this conversation among churches around churches changing their views or changing their mind or becoming more open, I don't know, like there are some people that talk about that like it's a kind of compromise or something, like they don't approve of that move. And then maybe other people who are interested in it talk about it as like, oh, it's a really hard thing or something. This book moves toward a celebration, how this is a great thing. And I guess I want to start the conversation book saying, how is your church? Like, what do you love about your church now? Like, how has this change in your church become like something that you regularly celebrate?
I can start. And so our church is just lovely now. It is so much easeful, so easeful, so free from there were so many anxieties that governed how we thought, felt, and behaved in the former iteration of us that just are gone. So I grew up in the Calvinist tradition, which is as dour as you can get in the realm of Christendom. And then we inhabited evangelicalism. You know, the Association of Vineyard Churches was evangelical at the core, and then tried to incorporate charismatic and Pentecostal practices. But the evangelicalism still, the motive force really is anxiety about your God standing and addressing that in a whole variety of ways. And a part of what it meant for us to become inclusive was not just to welcome people who formerly we kept out, but to redo the whole construct of Christianity so that exclusion isn't even, it's not, it cannot be done. It cannot be implemented in what we have come to feel is for us the right way to practice Christianity. But so what it means is that everybody's welcome, everybody's included. There's nothing that you bring into the sanctuary that could possibly exclude you. It's not even a question. Like, it's not just that the question's been answered, it was never a question in the first place. And so that does away with so many of the anxieties of coming in the door and so many of the anxieties of leading. Like, it's just joyful and easeful to be a leader in this place now, because really all you're doing is you're just trying to create a safe space where somebody who wants to connect with God here can, where that possibility is alive and unfettered and non-scrutinizing. And so just whole ways of relating to people that used to characterize our experience of church are gone. So, and then, yeah, honey, you can say more.
When we had our coming out service, and I think I started the teaching by just announcing that, the first sentence, and the place erupts in cheers. Now, part of that is because the people who were sad weren't there. But part of it was because we were pregnant with this moment and for a while, and by the time it came, it was like something waiting to be born, almost the explosion waiting to happen. There was this like major celebration and people are clapping, and then there was a smaller party for lunch afterwards at our co-author at Katie Mbork's, Dr. and Katie Mbork, who wrote the book with us, who we'll say more about later. But she herself is a lesbian, and her wife, and she worked so hard to help us with us to make this whole thing happen. And at that party were most of the gay people who had been attending our church at that point, and some of the allies. And again, it was like this like major like celebration, and people were like crying and laughing, and there was this feeling of freedom and this thing that we cared about. We actually did it. And I think that joy didn't leave. It would be other freedoms along the way, the language we used or the theologies we would evolve into. But it was, I think, that same kind of feeling, like this expanding experience of God being present to us and maybe of each other being present.
Hmm. Oh, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. I know as you both were talking with your warmth and joy and enthusiasm about what your church has become, I know, Tom, at one point, intentionally or not, you used the title of the book, which is also the name of your church, Sanctuary. I think you said there's like nothing someone could bring into the sanctuary that would exclude them. And I'm guessing maybe you mean that literally or metaphorically, but I don't know, like the title of the book, or maybe more to the point, like the name of your church, like how did you uh full disclosure for anyone listening who doesn't know, I too was a pastor of a church that had the word vineyard in the name. That's how we first met as pastors in that movement. And we too changed we didn't have to lose a lot of things when we left the vineyard, but we lost the name. So you had to choose a name. You chose Sanctuary. Like maybe say more. Like what does that word mean to you? What does it mean to the church that you've become?
Well, the process of choosing it was fun because we were leaving the Vineyard movement, so we had to jettison that name. So we did the name choosing how we do many things. We brought the church together. So we had a party that was organized by someone with some sophistication with branding and naming and things like that. I think we generated 300 possible names. And the kids actually generated the best ones. Like I think the best one from the kid, one of them wanted to do Wrecking Ball Church, and then one of them wanted to do Twinkler. And I was sad because we excluded those. Um, and so we had a few names that made the cut, and then we had a
The Miley
team.
Cyrus era.
Yeah. And Sanctuary actually wasn't on the final list, but then a few people just really advocated for it as a possibility.
Hmm.
And it just felt right. It felt like it really was an oasis of safety in the midst of a world that, especially in general, but for queer people in the religious sphere, it's been a harmful place and a threatening, unsafe place coming into a church. But for everybody, like we just want it to be a place that's where there is no threat, there is no condemnation, there's no judgment. Um, and so we loved it. The one thing that we had to do is there's everybody's favorite pub in town is called Sanctuary. So I did write a letter to the owner of the pub saying, "Are you okay if we name our church Sanctuary?" And he said, "Well, as long as you don't serve too much communion wine, we're good."
I see a brand partnership in the making.
Right. So we got the thumbs up from them. Um, yeah, but it feels like I don't think we understood at the time how good the name would fit who we've become, and just what it feels like to be in our space.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I think that's right. This lack of sanctuary is one of the I mean, we're kind of like we serve in a dying industry. A lot of people are leaving churches. There are thousands of churches closing every year in our country. And it feels like one of the reasons people leave for different reasons, but one of them is the church's reputation as homophobic or exclusive or as an unsafe place to be or as a judgmental community. And I guess in choosing that name Sanctuary, you're trying to speak a very different reality into being, it sounds like. Yeah.
And I think, the reason we were asked to write the book in the first place was because at that time, so many people were trying to change their church, and so many would be a very small number the churches at large,
They're out there. They're out there.
but it was trending among churches leaning progressive, like we weren't the first.
Yeah.
And there would always be a story like that would kind of make me like, like my heart skip a beat or something like, oh yeah, I woke up Sunday and I had a sermon that I prepared to teach, but then I felt God speak to me really clearly. No, just tell the church you're transitioning today and that I spoke to you, and this is why. And then you'd hear the story, and this church would implode or lose the vast majority of people or whatever. And obviously, it took us a really long time to do our whole process, but I think it caught the publisher's eye because that's the story you would hear of how many people you lost or the church dying. I mean, it's not a trivial thing, even if it's the right thing, which obviously we believe it is. And so we had just a little resonant with that, but not really, because we came out that January, and probably within a half a year, our numbers were down slightly, but not a lot.
Yeah.
But within a year after that, we were bigger than we'd ever been, and we added so many people because of our move.
Yeah.
People who didn't want to be in a church that wasn't inclusive, and didn't, or people who were queer and had, their obvious reasons and stories.
Yeah.
So that's been meaningful for us the whole time, that people have been able to come as a result of it. And instead of it, at a time when churches are dying, we feel the gift of the vibrancy and
Yeah.
just new people coming all the time.
Yeah. Adi, I want to ask you all more in just a minute about kind of what the change was like in your lives and in the church. And you write about that process in great detail and with great humor sometimes. But before I do, I guess I want to ask just a little bit more about the results of this, and also about your co-author, Katie. I mean, you two are two of the three authors. You're the senior pastor and another pastor and preacher at the church, Tom, but you co-wrote this book anyway. But you co-wrote this book with Katie, who you say is part of the LGBTQ community, and you two are straight, and yet you are now publishing as LGBTQ allies and being known as such. Like, what was no community is monolithic, but in your change process, as you were exploring becoming kind of open and affirming, or fully inclusive, or whatever you'd want to label it, during that process, or since then, like, what were, maybe how was Katie's partnership instrumental? What was her reaction to the story? And what were other members of LGBTQ community like? What were some of the reactions you got that you expected or that surprised you?
You can go ahead, honey. You can start.
Okay, are you talking about since we've become inclusive, or the process of becoming inclusive?
Kind of both, maybe, right? Like, yeah, how did Katie, your co-author, what were her responses like during the process, and maybe others then, but also now too? Yeah.
Well, to say, Katie was involved from the very beginning. She When she came, and we detail this in the book, but when she came, she wanted to talk to us, to talk to me, to find out if we were safe for her and her then wife and two children. And we were like in this kind of hyper, like, we want to do this right, even
Yeah.
though we weren't inclusive. We're like, we've seen so many people come and go, and we knew where we wanted to be. And so from the very beginning, we had this great conversation with Katie. And I think it alleviated her fears. I think they really wanted a church. She was having some struggles. They were having some struggles at that time in their marriage. The church was super instrumental in coming alongside them. But, like, I'll just say, for me, I just fell in love with Katie. Katie's a remarkable woman. She's a psychiatrist. She leads the queer, not a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, a family practice doc. She leads a queer clinic, and she has lots of higher administrative positions. So on her own, she's just smart and talented and able to make things happen. But she's lovely, and we got close and cared about each other. And though I had other queer friends, Katie she just became someone who was very hard to ignore,
Mhm.
who she was when we were talking about what rights people in the church could have, or what that meant. It emotionally became, I couldn't imagine a community where Katie didn't have all the same rights as I did. And that experience for us probably happened before we had everything completely worked out theologically. Um, but by the time Katie came, we knew the direction we wanted to go. So Katie fairly early on became someone who worked with us intentionally over the next several years to get us as a church ready to where we would go. And by time we came out, we had a number of gay folks who worshiped with us. Starting 2014, 2015, maybe a little bit earlier. That number kept growing even though we were not fully inclusive. And for many of them, they would say, wait, you guys aren't fully inclusive. Like, I think we had already started acting like we were before we actually became it. So I think people were grateful. They knew the direction we were going in. They were excited and hopeful. And I'll just say part of that is because when you're only used to getting crumbs off the table, a few extra crumbs feels good because we weren't fully inclusive. We only had the promise of it. So we weren't ultimately safe, but we were able to name that. We knew the direction we were going and wanted to get to. And I think the folks inherently trusted us in that direction.
And just to clarify, I just realized for people that don't live within this conversation all the time, you're using the word inclusive a lot, and you're saying we were not inclusive, and then when we were, if you had to put it in like a very few words, like what's the difference? Because a lot of churches say we welcome everyone. So what's the difference?
Yeah, Ken Wilson, who wrote his own books on all of this, was super helpful, even though he made me really mad. Before we were inclusive, we were on a phone call together with other people as well. And I said something about being proud of how welcoming we were, because we're so nice to everybody. And I'm such a nice person. I love everybody. Everybody loves me. And I'm like an Enneagram 3, and I do it so well. And Ken just very directly said, Adi, there's an infinite space between welcoming and inclusion. And I was heartbroken. And what he meant is anybody can be nice and can offer warmth and kindness while still not making a statement that you're abiding by, that you are fully inclusive at every level of church life. So when we said welcoming, we meant we're nice. We love you. Come and be with us.
So there is or there isn't such a thing as like a second class membership. Like you can have your marriage officiated or not. Like you can become a pastor or not, right? Like these structural, like that is or isn't true, right?
Yeah, and I think too, one of the differences that I've come to appreciate or wonder about between welcome and inclusive. Welcome is still, you can come to our thing, but there can be an agenda behind that, and we are going to conform you into the kind of person who fits in that thing. Whereas inclusion is really, we want to know you. We want what, if we're, we want what God has put in you to be able to be fully expressed here. And so it's much more, it's an attitude towards a person of discovery and interest and curiosity, as opposed to safety or conformity, or we haven't, we still have an agenda for you. You're still going to go through kind of our programming. And so to me, that's a part of the transformation for us, was even into welcoming. Like there would have been a time where we wouldn't have been even comfortable with that. But inclusion feels like it is actually a different attitude towards a human being.
We want to be shaped by you.
It's almost more than inclusion, maybe. What would be the next word? Welcome, inclusion.
Centering. I think centering.
Celebration, something like this. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, it feels like the onion, you keep going deeper into the onion, whatever. It feels like, even when I look at the stories of Jesus, and this is informed by our experience with our queer friends like Katie, that there's a centering and an exaltation of those who we have excluded and pushed to the margins. And so it's interesting because it really does feel like you never quite arrive, or we haven't yet, in this whole endeavor of how human beings come to belong to the group and how they are expressed in a group, that those kinds of things feel like they continue to grow and evolve for us. Like exactly that question, what is the next word that we're going to use to describe what we're trying to get to?
It makes me think of my time in the vineyard, which in many ways was lovely. But as a woman, for so long they were not egalitarian. They believed in a male-led leadership structure. They're complementarian. And so the fight was over time to become egalitarian, which they did in 2006. But I would say that then women were, on paper, women could do what they want, but I never felt like we're so excited now to have a woman's voice. Let's see what you bring, AD. Come and shape us. Change the whole thing. Let your whatever it means to be a woman influence or whatever gender. But I was like, okay, now you get to do it. I think that's what we learned the difference was like, oh no, it's not now you get to do it.
Yeah. I think Reservoir went through our own version of your church's process in sort of parallel moments. And I think I felt the difference between, announcing our inclusion and that we would perform same-sex weddings and that there would be no second-tier membership around here. But the difference between being fully inclusive and then a few years later, when the first time we had a pride service that was primarily led by members of our church who were also members of the LGBTQ community and leading us in worship through that lens. And I think, oh, okay, now that's moving from like, I accept you as equal or something to a true affirmation of, we're all bearing the image of God and we all have something to teach one another. I feel like you're describing that really well.
Yeah, I feel like you mentioned, you brought up Katie. She preached from, our stage. She gave a sermon one Sunday and she spoke from, I think it's Psalm 139. You made me from the womb. You've known me. You created me. And I remember thinking, I'd taught that passage and heard it taught.
Mm-hmm.
But hearing it from Katie and what it had meant to her to fight to that truth against her religion.
Yes.
I remember listening and thinking, I don't think I've ever heard the story in quite this way before.
Yeah.
And she could preach it in a way that I never would. And that was just representative of so much of what it and I think that's why, when we think about our story, there are plenty of other people who are fully inclusive ahead of us. Like we didn't lead the way on this.
Mm-hmm.
A part of the meaningfulness is the transformation from who we were to who we are now, and having inhabited the previous world and inhabiting the new one and seeing the differences and being alerted to things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about that transformation for a few minutes. So I was kind of connecting with a couple friends of mine in the Northeast who were making this transition more recently. And so I was a friend to their church, as they were going through this process. And I told them about you all because I said, well, we had the classic, like half our people left and we lost half our budget. And, we're still like a very vibrant church and I love who we are now. But our process kind of 10 to 15 years ago was accompanied by like degrees of, kind of church tearing and pain, and that feel like they were that you two clearly suffered cost in various ways for your changes and your church's change, but your church like suffered less. It felt like. So I've told people about you guys. I think Tom and AD are better pastors than me. And so I'm so glad like the book's out. People can learn from your story. I'm holding up the back of the book. What did you, obviously people should read the book. You're not going to like blow by blow the whole process here on our little interview, but like high level, like, I don't know. I don't mean just you personally, but like what did your church make any mistakes and in the change process, or what did your church do best, if anything, right? Like AD, you said it wasn't like someone just gave a sermon one day. God told me we're changing today, right? Like you had a pretty thoughtful relational process that both at the time and in retrospect, I actually really admire. So tell us a little bit, like if there's any mistakes, funny or not, that you made that you might advise other churches to avoid. And if there's anything that you feel grateful or proud of that, our church did this well, that other people could learn from. Because you said there are people still now trying to kind of thinking about trying to change their church in some way and maybe afraid to do it. So, yeah, what have you learned?
I would, I mean, our answer is straightforward. So I will say, like, I did a doctorate in change strategy. So I've had some thinking and changes. I don't know how much that played into it. But on our website, Tom describes the difference of our family cultures. Like, I'd come into his Dutch family culture in the very beginning as a young woman, you like to have a meal together. We'd all be sitting around the Sunday dinner table. And I would joke, like, I mean, like I was tormented because somebody would share, and by sharing, I mean, say like a sentence or two, and then there'd be silence. And I'd always joke that I could write a memoir in the before the next person. Like, I would have to do so many things. And then Tom would come to my Jewish house, and there's like 1,000 conversations, no matter how many people there are. Nobody cares about interrupting. Everybody's loud, everybody's talking.
It was
And
about 5 years in before I said anything.
yeah, he like
Your
raised his
sentence,
hands
right?
and nobody
Right.
cared. Like, like put down your hand and just interrupt someone. But I
The first time I met her dad, he kissed me full on the lips.
Oh,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I grew up,
Family
I grew
fun.
up Calvinist Dutch. Like, I
Love
don't think anybody kissed anybody on the lips ever.
or anywhere. But I think that it's the talking. Like, we talked ad nauseum every step of the way. And we did it with spreadsheets. We had lists like of everybody in our church. And all along the way, starting from, and Tom knows the dates better, but I'll just say 2010 till 2016, early when we came out. Like if we started reading books, then we made sure lots of people were reading the books we were reading as we were slowly moving. We talked to our leaders, which didn't always go well. That would be something that, like Tom would say, you came out of that one leaders meeting where all we did was ask the question. Like in 2010, Tom said, I'll never have another meeting like that. But I always wondered, I don't know, it was horrible, but we planted some seeds. Everybody kind of hates us at this moment, but we planted some seeds. But I would say, and not just as a strategy, these were people in our church who we loved, like who we respected, who gave money, who volunteered, who like hitched their selves our wagon. You know what I mean? Like that meant something to us, and we're aware, like this is a huge change. This is such a huge change that the evangelical church is entrenching, and they're mad, and you know what I mean? Like there's the stakes are so high for so many people. Like we're aware of the emotion of the stake as well as the kind of financial reality, the losses, the destabilizing effect this process could have. But we respected and liked the people. So we just spent a lot of time in systematic ways, each like incrementally having ad nauseum conversations with people. They would joke when they would get a call from us. First, they'd think, oh, am I in trouble? That Tom and I are calling them to schedule a meeting. And then they think, oh, it's another meeting about LGBTQ. And but they also would say they were grateful. So we did lots of things to look at theological convictions and to kind of underscore what we were doing. But I would say the main thing we did was to just talk to anybody and everybody, strategically, formally, informally, leaders, volunteers, etc., as we were going along, to give people a chance to be exposed to the same influences and to hear our hearts and to feel heard themselves.
Yeah, so Adi totally led the way in that because she led the way in the desire for our church to become inclusive, the awareness of the problematicness of not. At some point, I flipped, and so intellectually got ahead of her. But what that meant too is that once I became convinced that that's what ought to be the case with our church, I just thought, well, we should just do it now. You know, what are we waiting for? Why? And so we had because of 80's awareness of.
Let me say a quick parenthesis that I'm moved by people and you're moved by ideas. So as soon as you get an idea, like,
That's
let's just
fair.
do
Yep,
it.
that's 100% fair.
You
But I
mean, you might have been
say,
that guy that just announced it to the church one day, Tom.
yeah, it's totally possible.
And then Sanctuary would no longer exist, right?
Yeah,
I would say, who
that's
cares if we're worshiping in a tent with
that's
5 people? It's
100%
the
true.
truth.
I am so grateful for my role that I didn't have
That's more
my role in
Calvinist
creating
anyway. The
habits.
tent with just 5 people left in it, right? You might have been happy,
Right.
Tom.
Right. But I do, Steve, I do want to give you credit too, because you are named explicitly in the book. So there did come to be a point where we were very ready, and 80 was nervous and was reluctant and reticent. And she and David, our executive pastor, and I had had a lot of conversations, and we're just kind of in the, we're ready to do this. Why aren't we doing this?
Well,
And
you and David would have done it at any time,
then,
even though I'm the one who was ahead in the beginning. And I'm like thinking of this family and this family, and oh, I love them, and they're going to be so hurt, and they're going to be so mad, and they're going to leave, and maybe, and
And then 80 had a conversation with you, and you
yeah,
just asked her the question. I don't even, it's in the book. You're quoted in the book. And you
I
say
will
something
tell
like,
you, I will tell you how it
okay,
went.
yeah, I don't have
But
the copy right here in front of
it's
me.
my favorite part because it bothers Tom and David so much. It's so funny. Because I didn't have a reason not to, other than because it's not like at that point, the people who are going to come were going to come. The people who are going to be mad at us, like I was postponing having people yell at me. I
Yeah.
was postponing having people be disappointed, like going through that actual process of saying the thing. And that process is real for sure.
Yeah, who likes that?
Um, um, and so we're just kind of going along. And Tom and David were gracious. David's our executive pastor, but you guys were gracious. Like you never pushed me. Like I sort of don't even, when I think back, like you were so nice, and I'm just like not
That is
doing,
my
you
recollection
know.
too.
And then, but I had at that time, I think we were part of Association of Blue Ocean Churches, right? And Steve and I don't know if we were on the board or not, but we had a friendship and we were talking regularly, and it was super fun. And Steve talked about things happening at his church, and I talked about things happening at my church. And I like many people, love and respect you, Steve. But at
Sure.
some point, like we're talking about it, I'm just saying, yeah, like we're there in spirit, like we're there in heart. We just haven't done it. And Steve says, "Oh, well, what are you waiting for?" And I said, "Oh, okay, I guess we should do it now." And that was it. Like that's our story.
I just love Tom and that you and David just I kind of pissed you off because I basically did nothing. But
Well,
maybe because I'm just like a fellow extrovert feeler, somehow 80 responded to the
80
question in
came-
her soul. So
80 came to our next staff meeting. The next staff meeting, the three of us just said, well, I'm ready. And we said, why? What happened? Well, I talked to Steve.
who asked me a
David-
nothing question.
David and I were both really excited, like, well, that's great. We've been waiting, but why does he have so much influence? And we, yeah. So all that to say, you were a part of the change process.
Well, and I see, in all sincerity, like I'm excited for people to, I'm excited, especially frankly, for lots of people will enjoy reading this book because it's funny and you're great storytellers, as is Katie. But also I'm excited for pastors and church elders and leaders of different kind to get this book in their hands or on their device and read it because you did this process so despite mistakes we all make so graciously, so smoothly, such joy to your church. And I love your church, and I feel like it's a place where people were safe, and it's a place where God is safe and loved, and what a beautiful thing. So excited about this message getting out there, and grateful for your moral courage in it all.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for supporting us. Thanks for being a part of it. It's super fun.
Absolutely. Well, it's been great talking, and again, get Sanctuary. It's a It's a great story. You'll learn a lot from it too, especially if you're figuring out how your church could change. So thanks for sharing the story with us.
Very welcome. It was a pleasure
Thank you.
being here.
All right, till next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.